Welcome. This is the Drupal usability meeting for November 18th, 2022. I am Benji Fisher moderating and sharing my screen. And also present are Aaron McHale and Ralph Kohler. It's a small group today, but I think what I'd like to talk about is something that the three of us have been actively working on. So I guess for the sake of the recording, I'm now looking at the issue for today's meeting, which is 3320757. And what I would like to talk about is the reorganization of the block items in the administration menu, and I guess also in the path. So the meta issue we created a few weeks ago is 3318110. And I think the two of you, Ralph and Aaron, decided on the correct order in which to deal with these
That's right.
pieces.
Yeah, we figured out there's a very specific order they each need to be done in, which is partly influenced by the fact that we have a whole bunch of nested things in terms of the menu structure and routes. So we have to do the block type one before we do the next one, and then we can do the next one kind of thing. Otherwise, it just won't work if we do those in a different order.
Okay, so just as a quick status check, I don't think these links are updated automatically in the issue
Yeah,
summary, but they are updated in maybe in the sidebar. But the first step is RTBC. I'm not going to read all of the issue numbers since I gave the parent issue, but that's moving the custom blocks types to admin structure. So that's the first step. That's RTBC. The next step, move the custom block library to content, is needs review. And the third step, which the title is deliberately vague, is to move block layout link out of the structure menu. Doesn't say where to move it to. And that one, I guess there's no patch on yet. So that's the current status of these issues. And aside from the fact of supplying patches or merge requests, most of this is editing routing files. It's YAML files. The changes are pretty easy. We also have to pay attention to update the help text that references these pages and their paths and their titles. But that's not seriously hard.
yep. And that was something actually that came up because we got the first issue about the structure or sort of block types. We got to RTBC, and then someone really helpfully came in and said, "Hang on, we have to update the help topics module," which I felt I completely forgot existed until they came in and said that. So I felt a bit bad about that. So we made sure to do that and get it back to RTBC.
Yeah, I think the really helpful person you're thinking of is Amber Hines Mance.
Right. Yeah, that's right.
Actually, I was the first one who pointed it out that we needed to update it. And I think that she must search every day for issues that have mentioned help topics, because I don't think she was involved in this before then. But yes, she did some very helpful reviews. She gave some really nice comments, sort of describing very explicitly how she was testing them. That's, it's always annoying when someone says, yeah, I tested this and it worked, RTBC. And more details are helpful. Like, here are the steps I went through to test this, and everything looks good except step 19. That's a really, as you say, very helpful review. But sort of the overall strategy is that, until now, we have always said, well, this is a great idea, but we can't do it without user testing. So what I'm hoping is that we can get approval to make these changes without going through formal user testing if we just get enough people commenting that yes, this is a good idea, and even though we're used to the way it's been for years and years, we think that it's not going to be a problem moving these pages around. And that's why I'm encouraging people to talk about it at their meetup groups. And I think both of you already have, so thanks for that. And of course, I'm saying this not for your sake, but for the sake of the recording. And that's why I created this little slide deck. So the URL is slides.benjifisher.info/block-management.html. And Ralph and I have done some work on this just in the last day or so. And I think Aaron already presented this to his team at work. So it's now organized into columns. It's a nice Reveal.js slide deck. We start off with the current page, and talk about the breadcrumb and path, and then the menu structure, what it is currently, how we propose to change it, and then a side-by-side comparison. And then these are the screenshots that Ralph has been using for the custom block library, block types, block layout, and layout builder. And then some links to the meta issue on Drupal.org and also the 3 child issues. Encourage people to join the conversation on Slack and give a link to these slides. And of course, it's all a Creative Commons license. And one hurdle we've already cleared. Both maintainers of the block content module, I guess block content is the machine name and custom blocks is the label of the module. Both maintainers are on board, actively engaged with this project, so that's good. So really, just need to do the issues, and then the hard part will be getting approval from the product managers. Hi, and I see that Thomas Howell has joined us. Any questions, Thomas, about what we're talking about?
If I'm understanding it correctly, it just looks like we're talking about changing the menu around, similar to how we discussed last week for blocks.
Right. Well, maybe it was 2 weeks ago or 3.
Yeah,
but yes.
It kind of feels like we're doing a sort of status call stand up kind of thing as to where we are, because it seems to be maybe we can actually do that. Because I know, just a very minor tangent, but a while ago, I think it was your idea, Benji, for us to sort of focus in on some kind of like thing that we can all do. And this seems to be naturally something that has come up that we seem to be all focusing on. So perhaps like this could be something until we've got this done to keep the momentum in these calls. Maybe we could do a quick, status update each week on, okay, where are we at with this kind of thing to keep that momentum going.
That's right. So we have the slide deck, present it at your meetups, get feedback, get lots of people to comment individually or in groups that this is okay. Someone wanted to say something?
I was just going to ask, with something like this, in addition to meetups, where it's reaching out to people who, I guess, are naturally engaged in the community, would it make sense to reach out to any of the major supporting contributing companies, like any of the big places, like reaching out to Aqua or Aqua Support, reaching out to Pantheon, Pantheon Support, or other major companies where there might be people who deal a lot with the UI and customers, but may not be natural fits for folks showing up at local meetups?
Yeah, I think
to
that's
try
a
and
great idea. The one group that we don't have to worry about is people who haven't used Drupal before, because they are not. They are not the ones who are used to the existing structure, so they won't be impacted by the change. But sure, groups at Acquia or Pantheon would be good to reach out to.
Cool. So, I mean, I can take the deck. Is this link on Slack by any chance?
I think Ralph posted it in the Zoom chat a minute ago. Maybe that was
Oh,
before you joined.
One sec, I reposted. I guess Thomas joined after I've pasted it, and therefore, oops, 1 second.
Okay.
And I posted it in the block content channel in Slack yesterday, but we can also post it in Slack.
Awesome. I'm going to reach out internally at Acquia on this. But I think that if we can find people in any of our other meetups who work for other major contributors, I think the places where I would anticipate most interesting feedback for myself would be like, we have a product that is for like massive multi-sites. And I'm curious how someone who has like 500 sites, how they would react to these things shifting around for everything.
So kind of on that and what you were saying, so I presented this issue at the University of Edinburgh to our central website development team who do a lot of Drupal stuff, but it's a diverse team in that we've got developers, designers, site builders, and people of various experiences on there. So in addition to people who have a lot of years experience with Drupal, we also have people who come in, basically students, and work with us for a year. So we've got people who are right at the beginning of understanding Drupal. So it was actually a really good group of people who are exposed to Drupal, but different levels of experience. And I commented in the meta issue, but just to raise it here, that there was general sort of support amongst that group for this change. And one person, as someone who's used Drupal a lot, actually expressed strong support for this change, and so that was a good result. And again, thank you to Benji for I presented an earlier version of his slide deck, but it was just super useful to present it because it was really easy to get that. I just had a quick 5 minutes to present it, and it was good to have that. But that was a good example because we are currently building we're in the middle of doing a huge migration of a lot of sites. Potentially we're talking hundreds of sites to a new Drupal 9, Drupal 10 based infrastructure. So yeah, that's an example of that kind of thing you were saying, Thomas, where I guess it's slightly different in that previously a lot of people were using their sites weren't exposed to these interfaces. We're really, particularly a lot of the times here we deal with stuff that content editors are going to be exposed to, but this is one of those cases where you've got a subset of Drupal people who use Drupal who are going to be exposed to these changes. So, not so much people who are your casual content editors are less exposed to what we're going to be changing here.
I do think there is one impacted group that's going to be like, I don't think they will, I don't think they'll be against these changes, but it would impact them. And that's anyone who provides enablement or learning, training, things like that. It's basically, this is such a significant change. It impacts certifications, it impacts documentation, all of these things. Including for any sites that, like, if a university uses a large multi-site and this changes all of the sites, it impacts all documentation that they have for their students and faculty, for instance. So this is the type of thing where I think it is not about whether or not, I think this is a great change and I am 100% behind it. I think part of the opportunity is to make certain there's lots of time, lead time to get people ready to do the work to change everything that needs to be changed when something so fundamental is shifting. It's one of the bigger changes that I've seen menu-wise in a while.
Yeah, and I totally agree with what you're saying. I think as well, that the thing I've been saying for some time in various on some issues and also on, I think it was like one of these issues, we shouldn't, you know, just because we've done something a certain way for a long time doesn't mean that's a good reason not to change it. If there's like a good reason to change something, then we shouldn't be necessarily be afraid to make that change, because sometimes I feel like issues can get stuck because on the argument of like, oh, we've always done it this way for like 10, 11 years, therefore we, you know, it becomes more difficult to move it forward. I think the good thing we have here is these changes are going to go into 10.1 and we don't even have 10.0 out yet. So we've got a lot of time actually to communicate through the regular channels that this is a change that's going to happen. So part of that is in making sure that this gets into the like release highlights for 10.1 and the release notes, so that, as you said, those groups are well aware of this in advance, because you know, there's every core version has new things like CK Editor 5. That's a big change in the way content editing is done. You know, that's going to impact a lot of those training materials, a lot of those you know, documentation, things like that. So I think this is not a isolated example of that. So it's important that we make sure that this does get into those like release highlights, release notes, and then any, you know, again, I don't want to like necessarily shift the burden, but being realistic, if you're a training provider, right, you should be paying attention to those release notes and updating your networks and things. So I think that's the thing we can do, is make sure that it does get into those.
Ralph, you wanted to say something?
Yeah. Building on Thomas's point, would it make sense to ask at least a few of those, let's say, Drupalize Me or any entities at universities who provide documentation, what's their reaction time is actually to update their documentation, and if it would make sense either to inform them right now that they could follow along the discussion already and be prepared, or if it would be necessary perhaps to move it to 10.2 in the worst case. But as Musgrave is definitely heading for 10.1.
Yeah, I don't think we need to ask them for permission or timelines. But I think it's a good idea, if you know anyone at such a company, to give them some advance warning. I will reach out to the documentation team because the user guide is going to need updates. And I think I'll also get in touch with Suzanne Dergacheva, who's a past member of the DA board and does a lot of training. Hopefully she can, you know, give a comment on the issues from the perspective of someone who does training. And also don't want to be updating their work, but I don't think we need to get permission on timelines based on people who do training.
Yeah, it wasn't meant as a permission, but more of a gently ask what their need is. But just that in the idea, I could also ask Arena, who's over at Stanford, and she knows perhaps to which groups it would be useful to reach out in regards of documentation as well.
Yeah, Aaron?
Yeah, I think well, I'm aware there's and I'm blanking on its name, and that's terrible, because there's that initiative to bring people in and train them on Drupal. And I'm completely blanking on the name of it because I was listening to a Talking Drupal podcast about it recently. And it's you know, it's the one where like they bring in a cohort of like students and they get trained on, I think they're piloting it and they're looking to expand out the program, but I think it's something that maybe the DA is involved in. So I'm trying to remember the name of the program. But anyway, if we can remember the name of that program that I'm talking about, yeah, they're probably a good group to engage with, because in terms of the training, because they're already obviously close in the community, and that is a sort of, you know, I think part of a community initiative. it's sort of around the areas of like promote Drupal, discover Drupal, those kind of like, getting more talent into Drupal. Anyway, it's yeah, I think but I also want to be mindful, like this is not a problem space unique to this. So I wouldn't want to just frame that as a, oh, we're doing this one thing, like how would you react to it kind of thing. I think like I said with like CK Editor 5, again, that was a big change. And there's lots of examples of like changes in core in various versions where there's like big shifts in the way we maybe do things, like layer builder was an example. And there's also a case where like new stuff comes into core, and obviously people, unless they're actively paying attention to the change records and to the release notes, are maybe not necessarily aware of these new things. So I guess there's an opportunity, if we were going to do something like that, to engage with people, it's like be slightly more strategic about it in terms of like, and maybe partnering with people who are interested in these areas to say, is there something here about like how effectively are proposed changes or these kind of changes that are coming like communicated to, how effective is the communication about things that are coming up or things that are happening? And that seems like, in a way, that almost seems like outside the scope of this group. I mean, it's good that we're talking about it, but I feel like there are other, there's initiatives in the community or like even the DA that are probably better placed to like spearhead some kind of conversation around, changes that are coming up and how those are communicated.
Yeah, it seems like a couple of weeks or months ago, we were talking about the kind of communication channel from D.O into Drupal instances.
Right.
And it sounds like a perfect example of the type of communication, like some way of highlighting key messages like that. Because I was just imagining when I was back at the university myself years ago, and you'd be using a piece of software like Maple, and something changed, and like the instructor, everyone was still trying to teach something that was no longer like what was there. So even if it was a better menu, everything that had been created around it reference things, and everyone's like, is this broken? What's wrong? I agree, this group is not the right place for the conversation, but it might be a good key use case for that communication channel in future versions of Drupal, because maybe this isn't something we can solve for this particular issue, but it would seem to me to be a pretty strong case for something that helps educate administrators as to majorly impactful changes like this, so that that they have to get the word out.
Okay, Aaron gives a thumbs up in chat, but I'd like to look at some of the next steps that we should be thinking of. So where was it? So I forget which of the particular issues it was, but this one was brought up. It's issue 286-2859, which is to create a top-level extendable content admin menu route that behaves like structure. So this issue is about making the content and structure portions of the admin menu more consistent. And I think all of us agree that this is not something we have to do before or at the same time as the changes we're discussing, but not everyone agrees with us. And so I'd like to spend some time looking at this. I meant to look at it in advance of this meeting, but I haven't had a chance yet. So I think the best solution to get everyone on board would be to come to an agreement on this issue and then do it at about the same time, try to get it into Drupal 10.1. A lot of people think that, well, not a lot of people, a few people think that by adding more things to the content menu, we're sort of making the current situation worse and strengthening the case for this issue. Has anyone else had a chance to look at this yet? Aaron, go ahead.
Thanks. Yeah, I've been aware of that one for a while, and obviously it's kind of feels like it's gotten stuck for a while because I think that there's not really a clear direction on how best to proceed to it. I think like ultimately what we're almost in a, with the current state in core, it feels like there's a level of, like the way things are is some way like a compromise, because whatever we do with this issue, I don't think there's like one solution to this problem space that is perfect in every case. Like if we make the content area behave like structure, then we've increased the number of clicks to get to the list of nodes, which is, I would guess on most Drupal sites, like, 70% of the time, that's where you want to get to. But on the other hand, like if we don't do something about it, there is a certain underlying issue of like potential confusion around like what the fact that there's like, you go to content, you get a list of content, but then off of that, there's these tabs for media and blocks or potentially for blocks and like, and other things, comments, for instance, because the word content gets conflated to mean multiple things sometimes in Drupal. So yeah, I don't really have a good answer to this problem, but I feel like I can't imagine a situation where like there's an ideal outcome for everybody, if that makes sense. And maybe there is, maybe I just haven't thought of it yet.
Yeah, that's sort of the best possible outcome, is that we come up with a good solution to this problem that everyone can sign on to. Perhaps some variant of the ideas discussed that that makes everyone happy.
Yeah. I am reminded actually about this because this is another thing. There's a parallel to this around permissions. Like everybody always agreed that permissions was hard, difficult, right? But it felt like such a big problem. And so I think it was you, Ben, you took a very pragmatic approach of basically saying, here's like one thing we could do to make this easier. And then here's another thing we could do. And so that was like things like adding a permissions tab to like entity, bundle configuration or entity types. So now you can go and see permissions just for that. Or in the module screen, having a permissions link that shows you those permissions just for that module. So like maybe there's maybe there's smaller incremental things we can do here. And I know one that comes to mind is maybe part of the solution, because part of the solution could be, how do we do this but not make it harder to get to the things that you want to get to? So maybe that is taking some of the features of like the admin toolbar module and bringing them into toolbar, where you could hover over content and get a drop down that takes you to these pages. And then that mitigates the element of 2 clicks to get to the list of nodes, right? So maybe there's more creative solutions to this problem that we could come up with that would ultimately allow us to solve this issue.
Right. Yes, this was my doing, the manage permissions page for any content type, any vocabulary, etc. Yeah, so I don't know that it's worth talking about now until we have a chance to think about it, but maybe put on your thinking caps and look at the comments currently on the issue. And as Aaron suggests, maybe we can come up with some new idea that makes everyone happy. And then we could try to get that into 10.1 as well.
And something else to think about, Benji, is it also possible that maybe not a new idea, but something that another piece of software that people find to be easy to use already addresses this? So a pattern used elsewhere in the world that might translate well.
Yeah, if you can find something, it seems kind of Drupal specific, but maybe I'm just sort of looking at it with my Drupal glasses on, and I should try to step back.
Well, this is something where I was thinking anyone who works for a firm that, like, I've really mostly had Drupal experience with a dash of WordPress, but I'm just curious if just there's a whole slew of different pieces of software that manage things these days. And if you replace the word content with whatever it was that it managed, contact management, whatever the software would be. And so anyone who works for a very large agency might know of something that those of us on this call wouldn't have had the experience with. So that's why I bring it up. It's not just something net new, not super mega creative, maybe something, there's an Apple interface that would be perfect in this. And we're like, hey, this is how they did their menu. Think about it.
WordPress manages posts. Various e-commerce sites have sort of similar
Exactly.
managements. One other thing I would like to bring up is this one, 3318112, to move the block layout link out of the structure menu. And this is the most recent idea. Aaron came up with this during our meeting, I guess on October 28th, according to this comment. And I think that the idea of putting it in the themes menu or the appearance page is pretty good. That was Aaron's suggestion. So let's just, so I'm talking about this page, the block layout page, where you have subtabs for each enabled theme, and then you have the blocks in each region. And sort of or at least one argument for putting it in the appearance section is that the update, the settings tab also has that same structure. There are settings for each enabled theme. And so blocks are put into regions for themes. So let's make it another tab on this page. There is just one person who has suggested this comment, I think number 9. So initially my thoughts for appearance is that it's more related to styles, the look and feel of the content, as opposed to the arrangement of the content. Maybe there's a more appropriate name that could be used for that menu, or at least the icon changed. So I think he has a good point here. And if we are going to move the block layout to a sibling here, someone else commented that list might need to be changed. Like, should we be calling this menu item something other than appearance?
I vaguely remember in the old days it used to just be called themes.
Yeah, and that has a lot to recommend it, doesn't it?
So one of the other strong arguments I think I came up with for why this is a good place to put it is because every theme defines its own regions. Like the block layout page is, in a sense, entirely theme specific. Like you could create your own theme and define any regions you want. You can call them whatever you want. There's no prerequisite to regions. There's some conventions like header, footer, content. I think content might be the only one. I think Drupal, if it doesn't find a content region, I think it doesn't even make you have one. It just kind of like, if there's no regions, it assumes here's a default content region, right? But like basically this page is completely theme dependent, even down to the configuration, where the configuration is broken up for blocks, like is separated by theme. So there's a really strong case for saying, actually, it makes sense to put this with the other stuff related to themes. Now I don't know what the best way to label all of that is, because obviously maybe appearance is not the same. I don't know if theme is better. I mean, theme is slightly more related to the thing you're doing, because, well, I go here to install a theme, I go here to configure a theme. Drupal.org calls them themes. Why does this tab call them appearance? So you know, they're well, to be fair, and there's an extend tab. It's like, well, why are themes not under extend? Oh, but that's just modules. That used to be called modules, but at some point it was changed to extend. Like, there's probably some work that could be done on like reconciling these differences, but that's what I've got so far.
If I go back into my old memories, which could definitely be faulty, I thought appearance and extend changed around the same time because there were usability tests where new users of Drupal, they didn't know what theme meant. They didn't like appearance and extend were terms that were more generic and less specific to a Drupalism. And I've long wondered if rather than the problem being appearance and extend, it's the fact that D.O and our documentation continued to persist in that Drupal island approach language-wise, rather than talking about themes as being appearance changes. So just kind of flipping the argument on its head is the issue that we changed Drupal, but we didn't change anything else around Drupal.
Interesting point. Ralph points out that in German, this menu item is called design. That's the translation for appearance.
I like design better. That's an actual job that people do. I don't appear.
But you do appear in this meeting. And then you disappear when it's over. I think sorry, I had an idea in my head and then my silliness distracted myself. Okay, so I'm also aware that like Project Browser is up and coming, and I think that is gonna tackle themes at some point. So you know, something could happen there. I think maybe in later phases that's gonna look at themes. So I mean, you know, the whole thing about what Drupal.org does is maybe moot at some point in the future. Or at least we can, you know, we might want to keep an eye on what happens in relation to Project Browser. I'm mindful that we also had a bunch of issues and we organized them around like improving the appearance page itself, because there was a bunch of issues that we identified that improvements we could make. So there's also that. I don't think any of them proposed any big restructuring. It was more just like aesthetic changes, like moving things around. But yeah, it's definitely something that we should keep on the radar in terms of what Project Browser is doing.
Okay, so we do have some time left in the meeting. Shall I stop sharing, Aaron? And did you want to talk about some related issues?
Sure.
Okay, I'll release the screen share.
Okay, I'm going to make sure I'm sharing the right thing. In fact, I'm going to share the whole screen, because if I don't, it's not going to work. Okay, I had posted a comment on here just saying
we
that.
just see a bunch of eagles and trees.
Hang on. I think I shared the wrong desktop. Yeah, I shared the wrong desktop. At least you got to see some nature in this meeting. There we go. Yeah, I meant to share the screen with the zoom on it. There we go. Okay, so yeah, do you see that okay? Yeah.
Yeah.
So in the issue for the meeting, I just posted some thoughts I wanted to share. So the first one was relating to the moving custom block library to content, which was issue 286-2564. But it wasn't directly related to that issue. It was just while I was doing the testing, this permission particularly, an idea came into my head about it. So I'm going to jump over to this Drupal site that I've set up here. I'm going to go to, in fact, I'm going to open a new private browsing window so that I can bring this up and demonstrate. So I created just a regular user. I just call it test because I'm very not at all creative. And if you want to give So if you want to give that user, we're going to use the authenticated user role here just for convenience. So if I give them the toolbar permission, and I'm also going to give them the, well, that's not going to work. If I give them the, where is the, speaking of the difficulties of using the permissions interface, I'm going to give them the permission that allows them to use the administration theme. And I'm just going to save that just now because I just want to confirm that that has worked. Yeah, so you can see they can now use the toolbar. Interestingly, they can use the appearance page. I don't know why. That is bizarre because did I give them I gave them use toolbar.
I think you gave them the wrong permission under system.
I did give them wrong. I did give them the wrong permission. That is not what I meant to give them.
You wanted
it was
to give them
the
permission to use the admin theme.
Yes, the view administration theme was that was the permission I meant to give them. Okay, let me just refresh this again. Aha, there we go. Okay, so this is now empty. I'm gonna give them yeah, the use administration pages and help.
So slow down. You've given them two permissions so far. One is to use the toolbar and one is to view the admin theme. And they currently can't see anything in the.
Yeah, so there's nothing in the manage menu here. So if I then give them the the use administration pages and help permission, which I have to do if I want them to have access to any of the administration screens. You can see that they get, now by giving them that one permission, they get structure up here, which has nothing in it. They get configuration, which has nothing in it, and they get help. The idea is that this, I think we should break that out into be slightly more granular, because I think if you want someone, if you then want someone to have access to like just manage content, I don't believe there's a way to do that without then giving them like this permission, and they can then see these additional items even if there's nothing in them. So that was kind of an idea I wanted to bring up, is maybe we break that permission out, or we change it so that if there's nothing in these lists, they don't, like, you know, they get an access denied, so these tabs don't show up. Because I don't think it's helpful to have that, you know, have these here if there's nothing in them and nothing for you to get to. Just to kind of illustrate that as well, if I, there's another, I believe it's permission here. So let me just double check if I can do admin/content, which I can't. So I think if I go to, let's see, if I go to the, yeah, let's see. Yeah, comment module is a good example, actually. Administer comments and comment settings. I assign that permission to the authenticated user and come down here and hit save. What I think happens if I refresh, yeah, they still don't have access to that. So there's another permission I need to give them, which is interestingly under the system module of all places, because that's where that root is actually located, which I believe is, I thought it was under system.
It's under the node module.
Yeah, do you know what? If you don't, this is interesting. If you don't have the node module installed, it appears under system. But I think node takes over that permission and sort of repurposes it if you have node installed, which is, you could argue is a good thing and a bad thing on its own. But
okay,
it's probably.
So Aaron, I'm the reigning expert on permissions, how permissions are managed in Drupal. So that particular permission is defined by the system module.
Yeah.
And when building the permissions form, it is explicitly plucked out and put under the node module.
Yeah.
Because and it was done that way again, because it always used to be provided by the node module. And when we added JSON API and people needed access to things when the node module wasn't enabled, the permission was moved to the system module, but they kept it in the same place on the permissions page.
Yeah, it's it makes my head hurt a little bit, but that is I think that is something potentially as like an issue, a related issue to the one we were talking about earlier about restructuring the content menu. Maybe that's something which could help with that if that was detangled from Node. I don't know. Because yeah, if you have the Node module installed, you kind of have to then give them access to come over here and access the content overview page, which in itself I don't think is a huge problem, because it doesn't technically, it just gives you access to view that page. Yeah, it doesn't actually give you any extra things you can do, but now you can say I can get to that page, and now I can get to the comment tab. So there is, it's not great, but if you don't have Node installed, this page is just also like an empty, like it just says there's no items to display here. So yeah, that's where I'm landing. So two things that I'm thinking about is that permission could potentially be done better if we do something with the previous issue we looked at around sort of redoing the content link. But also, like, again, I still see the structure and configuration links, like, even though there's nothing in them. So I think that's potentially something that by splitting up that previous permission about the help administration and help pages, maybe that is something that we could address, or just make these a bit more contextual, so that if there's no tab here, if there's nothing in here, kind of thing.
Okay, so let's see. You present. Let's focus on one thing at a time. You've presented this problem that with a few permissions you've granted your test user, there's this unfortunate situation where they have access to structure and configuration links, but when they go to those links, there's nothing there, and that seems awkward. And so one possible solution is to give more granular permissions, so that you can grant someone access to help or configuration or structure individually.
Yeah.
There are probably other solutions. Thomas, Ralph, do you want to comment on this?
So, oh yes, sorry. It's been a long time, but back when Drupal 8 first came out, I was building a site where I wanted to treat, I guess you could think of them as super users, or just simply like your editorial staff, as if they were in the admin area, because I didn't want it to be visible to general authenticated users. So think of it as if there were three groups. You had people in the site that were just using the site, but they were authenticated. You had a robust set of content editors, think newspaper, where you had the head editor, you'd have a copy editor who just would go through things, and you had a robust workflow. When I tried to do something where I put, because I wanted to use the admin theme specifically for the editorial workflow, but I didn't want to expose to them things like this, like the content and structure stuff, because that wasn't part of what I wanted them to be seeing. But I needed them to be more elevated in interaction with the site than what they saw if they were just a base authenticated user. And I ultimately gave up trying to make it work, because all of these things in confluence made it really difficult to come up with something that didn't have dead ends, that didn't have stuff that confused people. And so I'm wondering if, rather than worrying about the specific things, we tried to think about what the actual end goal was. Like, what is it we're trying to do? Like, why we want someone to have these sets of permissions, if that might not help illustrate exactly what we need to be doing, and then solve those individual problems one by one.
So you think we should start by coming up with some use cases, some user stories? or
Yeah, user stories that make sense within this context, like use this as the motivator. We want to solve this, but I worry that if we just try to solve this in isolation without knowing what the situation is, why we would want to be giving these permissions, we might just make everything more complex with no added benefit, but this doesn't happen.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'll just say we've only got about like 4 minutes left. So, but it does sound like for this discussion, it sounds like we have identified there is potential problem or room for improvement. So that is worthy of at least creating an issue to have space to discuss it, or at least finding an issue. Personally, I think there is risk if we like introduce additional permissions. So maybe, as I said, we could do something smarter where like if there's nothing here, this link simply doesn't appear, and that's probably could be done using like an access control handler or something,
Right.
rather than introducing new permissions, because then there's a risk like you forget to give people those permissions and it's just more permissions you have to like give out to people, and it becomes, you know, I don't know. It feels like the less permissions if we've got permissions that we're creating unnecessarily, that doesn't seem like a good thing to me. If we can find another way to achieve it.
Yeah, Thomas is giving a thumbs up to that suggestion. I was also thinking the same thing. And Ralph also gives a thumbs up.
Yeah. Okay, I'll at some point this in the coming week I'll find or create an issue to at least have a space to discuss the problem.
Okay. And I think Thomas is right. A good place to start would be coming up with some use cases. Okay. 3 minutes left. Anything else you want to say before we close out today's meeting?
I'll just add there was an additional thing, but obviously we're out of time, so I'll save it for next week. But as a spoiler, it's to do with like it relates to help and help topics and all that kind of stuff, and the admin UI being kind of sometimes disjointed. So look forward to that discussion.
Okay.
And I wanted to add, I've commented on several of the child issues and added results from the two conversations I've had lately. And in particular, for the move the blog to the content page issue, there is a potential follow-up issue idea in, as well as in the layout builder one. So if any one of you has time and is interested in, then would be nice to take a look.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think I saw your comments. I think I'm trying to think about these issues one step at a time.
Yep.
We've got a lot of issues here, so for my own sanity, I'm trying not to consume too much information at once.
Right, and I want to focus on getting things to the point where we can get permission from the product managers.
But yeah, good to have that stuff on the issue as well, so we can keep, you know, yeah, feel free to keep adding things we can discuss.
This will keep us busy until 10.1 comes out. Okay, thanks again, and we'll do it again next week.
Great, thanks all.
Thanks, everyone.